Welcome to Tower Talk Business Radio, where we bring you conversations with the top business minds on Long Island and around the nation every week. Featuring expert consultants and small business owners who have found success but are also willing to share their top tips, failures, and give gritty, matter-of-fact advice based on their firsthand experience. Now, let's get down to business on Tower Talk Business Radio on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello and welcome to Tower Talk Business Radio, powered by the Nassau Community College Foundation. My name is Ray Schwetz, AVP of Business Banking at Jovia Financial Credit Union, and we're focused on being the premier resource for business and entrepreneurship. Our guest today is filmmaker Braden King, a New York-based cinema journeyman who graduated from USC in '93, released his first feature as co-director in 1998 called Dutch Harbor, Where the Sea Breaks Its Back, a film about crab fishing in Alaska. His work since then has been released theatrically, exhibited in festivals including Sundance, and broadcast on HBO, BBC, Sundance, and MTV. Braden's latest film, The Evening Hour, opens in theaters on July 30th. So Braden, first of all, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with us about your latest film, The Evening Hour. I'm very excited to hear about your journey with this project because it's a very powerful and compelling film. So thank you again for making time for us today.
Total pleasure. I appreciate having the conversation. Thank you.
I'd like you just to tell me a little bit about yourself and your journey to becoming a filmmaker.
I knew from a pretty early age that I was interested in filmmaking. I was fortunate enough to go to a high school in the north suburbs of Chicago with a really strong arts program, and so have kind of a deep history in photography and music. I also grew up playing in bands and was even a partner in a very kind of homemade indie music studio in Chicago in the 90s. And I think at some point it kind of clicked that filmmaking was an opportunity to sort of combine all the different media and elements that I love so much together to kind of create experiences and in many ways to get out in the world in a very specific way and have an opportunity to have life experiences that you can't really get any other way. So for me, it was kind of a perfect storm, a deep interest in visual arts, photography, music, that all came together to make me want to pursue this.
Now, are there themes that you look for when you're choosing a project? Are there themes that kind of draw you in as a filmmaker that you want to explore?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's a combination of a lot of the stories that I've told or the films I've been involved with are sort of heavily involved in landscape and how geography kind of shapes our lives. I'm also interested in projects that take place or are shot in regions and areas of the world that haven't had a lot of films shot in them before. So there's almost like an expeditionary aspect to my interest in filmmaking, going out and almost metaphorically kind of mapping the territory in a new way with cameras and creating cinematic worlds in places that that are sort of underrepresented or that haven't been represented. So that includes places like the Aleutian Islands up in Alaska. Or my first narrative feature film was was one of the first American films ever shot in Armenia. And then I think also I'm interested in, we give a lot of our lives to these projects. They take us away from our loved ones and families, and you end up spending 2, 3, 4 years involved in these films by the time you get all the way through them. And so I do look for projects that seem to have the possibility of the process having intrinsic value, meaning like, if the cameras all fell in the water, it was still worth it to go up to Alaska and spend 8 months there in the winter and get to know the crab fishermen and that kind of thing. And I think that in that sense, it all goes hand in hand together. These projects that are sort of shot in places that haven't been on camera that much before, collaborating with the communities there, having kind of an expedition feel to the films all comes together to pique my interest, I would say.
That makes a lot of sense because one of the things that really drew me into the film was the background, the Southern Appalachian Mountains. I mean, it's pretty much, they're a character in the film as much as the principals are, and it is beautifully shot. I would definitely say that this is a film that begs to be seen on the big screen. I mean, it's just gorgeous. It draws you in almost despite the intense nature of the subject matter of the film. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? What drew you into some of these characters?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for the compliments on the film. It's certainly gratifying to the entire team that we feel very lucky to have had the premiere at Sundance in 2020 in front of audiences and on a big screen. And the fact that the film's going to theaters now, especially given everything we've all been through over the last year and a half or so, it feels really special and lucky. The collaboration with Declan Quinn, the cinematographer on the film, was really a dream for me, given his history and expertise. And what drew me to this project, to answer your question more directly, was a combination of all the things we've been talking about. I mean, when I first read Carter Sickles' book, it just presented me with such a complex and nuanced and unique portrait of Appalachia that I'd never really seen before, and characters that were complicated in human ways that I felt like I had rarely seen, that were both good and bad and flawed and sort of trying to make it through life and their challenges in whatever way they could and doing the best they can. And the fact that the book was sort of set in such a compelling setting and region that, you know, while there had been films shot in Appalachia, I felt like this was a view into that world that I hadn't seen before. And the combination of what I knew was just a beautifully compelling landscape, a geography that really affects people's lives and that the inhabitants are very attached to, and sort of interwoven set of narrative strands that gave the film a kind of reasonably high horsepower dramatic engine under the hood there, all came together to really grab me and feel like, you know, and make me feel like this was a story I was really interested in bringing to the screen.
You are listening to Tower Talk Business Radio on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ray Schwetz, and our guest today is filmmaker Braden King, director of The Evening Hour. Let's talk about the cast a bit. The cast that you put together was amazing. These characters felt like folks that you've either known or, you know, you're dropped into the middle of their lives, but you get that sense of the backstory of these characters and their relationships with one another and their relationships with the land. How involved were you with the casting of the film?
Allison Astron, the casting director, the New York casting director and primary casting director, and Erica Arvold, who did the sort of regional casting for us, were real true partners on this film. Allison and I got very close, had a very creative relationship that sort of went beyond just like, well, what about this actor? What about that actor? And really deeply, we got into a very deep discussion about the storytelling and trying to put an ensemble of actors together that would be very strong from a performance standpoint, but who could also kind of weave themselves into the landscape we're talking about and not kind of pop out from it the way you sometimes see. So that was a real journey that took place over quite a long period of time. And Allison and I did that together. We looked at a lot of different actors and they all came in different ways. I could talk for a long time about this, but it ranged from a meeting and audition with Philip Ettinger, who I think about 30 seconds into the first read we did together, I kind of knew this was the guy, to a self-tape that Cosmo Jarvis sent from London that absolutely just blew our minds and was so different from anything else we'd seen in terms of a rendition of the character of Terry. Stacey Martin was someone who I had known from her previous work with directors ranging from Lars von Trier to Brady Corbet. Carrie Bechet was an actor who I admired for a long time. I grew up watching Lily Taylor, and Tess Harper was kind of amazing. Having an actor with roots that go all the way back to Tender Mercies was pretty amazing. And then, I also remember things like Mark Menchaca coming in for an audition for Everett, and literally, who is like one of the sweetest guys you'll ever meet in your life, but honestly scared the hell out of me in the audition room. It was everybody had a varying path to the film, but one of the other wonderful things about shooting films in the way I do and in these kind of very remote locations is you end up with a cast and crew that's almost self-selecting. Like if you're up for that adventure, it's pretty much guaranteed that you're kind of on the right wavelength for what we want to do. We were 3 hours from the nearest airport and really out in the middle of nowhere. And there's a kind of cohesion that's bred by that becomes very, very strong.
And you can see it, the interaction. It's the actors really truly embody the roles and they have this relationship with one another. And I guess the landscape certainly helped to develop that. Can you talk a little bit about your work with Lily Taylor as well? In a relatively smaller role, she really brought just this amazing life to that part. I also wanted to ask you a little bit about the color scheme there, because I thought it was interesting that when she showed up, that she had red on, as opposed to the kind of green that was just kind of fading in the background. Was that purposeful?
Well, to start there and move backwards, I mean, I think that when Ruby reemerges into the world of the film and the family and Cole's life, she's, coming in from the outside and is definitely sort of almost sticking out like a sore thumb as someone who's been estranged in a way. And yes, as her character sort of becomes re-ensconced in the family and the community, her color scheme starts to blend in a little more. And that's an example of the kind of work that I was doing with the costume designer, Carissa Kelly. Each character almost has like a costume arc throughout the film. And we were doing similar color studies and, thematics with production designer Debbie Davila as well. So all of that becomes a part of the storytelling. And, with Lily and the other actors, some of it goes back to what I was saying a few minutes ago about trying to cast an ensemble that could kind of weave weave themselves into this landscape. But there was also a sort of deep collaboration with the community on a lot of levels that range from access to locations to so many of our background actors and even kind of like assistant crew and so on came from the local community. We did a huge open call for a lot of the background, and even a lot of the actors that you see who only have a few lines and that kind of thing were either non-actors or had only been in a couple of things, but were from Harlan and the surrounding area. That what you end up with is a production whose sort of the line between the community in which we were working, the landscape in which we were working, and the production itself became very blurry in a way that I think helped everyone kind of melt into the story and the location and the atmosphere and what we're talking about. And just to bring it full circle and kind of talk about working with Lily, and this sort of goes for the whole cast, I think one of the great goals for me was trying to create opportunities for performances that would leave the viewer with the feeling that these people were living and breathing and wandering around this world that we're experiencing, whether they were on camera or not. I'm always kind of thinking about how you keep the cinematic world going and the lives of these characters going sort of outside the four corners of the screen. Like in an ideal world, you want at least part of the movie to work the way a book works in the viewer's mind, and that they can you want to almost leave gaps for them to fill in and with their own ideas, and for them to be able to enter into the world of the film a little bit as well. So all of that kind of feeds into the direction and how we collaborate together to bring these characters to life.
Definitely works because you definitely are immersed in that world. I cared for each and every one of them. And as you mentioned with Mark, maybe he's a sweetheart in person, but oh boy, what a menacing villain. Yeah. Working together in a remote location, as you mentioned, you kind of grow close. I imagine it's kind of like your family for a very short, concentrated period of time. Do you have any memorable or funny experiences on the set?
I'm trying to think of what I can repeat publicly. There were a few. One thing that happened that I always got a big kick out of is that while Cosmo Jarvis didn't sort of go full Daniel Day-Lewis, he did stay in accent the entire time he was in Kentucky. Cosmo's from, I think he's actually originally born in New Jersey, but grew up in London and resides there. And I think he's a UK citizen. From the moment he arrived on set, he had already studied YouTube videos and anything he could get his hands on, like home movies from people of the region, to get his accent down. And he's an incredible mimic and was able to do that to a degree that he fooled a lot of the local crew. You know, people were coming up to me and saying, "Where'd you find this guy? Is he from over in Hazard County?" Or like, "Where's he from?" Or they'd ask Cosmo where he was from. And he'd say, London, kind of an accent, and they'd be like, "Oh, London, Kentucky." He's like, "No, London, England." And people almost thought they were making fun. He was making fun of them. They didn't believe that he wasn't from there. So that's kind of how, deeply into the role of Terry and the accent he got. There was a lot of bonding with the locals, a lot of, the Eagle Bar is a VFW hall that we all got temporary memberships to, and got to know a lot of the guys that hang out in there. And that became kind of the gathering watering hole for the crew. And like I said, there was a blurry line between the production and the locals by the time we left. Those guys playing cards in that first bar scene are the real card players. They're there all the time. You could probably go there tonight and go see them.
How long were you shooting there?
Shoot itself was about 30, depending on how you count, and some of the half days and split crews and things like that. I think we were somewhere in the range of 30 to 36 days. It was about 30 days. We started, I believe, in first or second week in October and went to right before Thanksgiving. With pre-production, I think I was down there for a total of maybe 3.5 months. I think we arrived in August, maybe July actually, and then stayed through November.
And how involved in the post-production were you and in the editing?
I edited for about 8 or 9 months total, through the edit, scoring, final mix, all that stuff, and worked with two amazing editors. Andrew Hayfitz, who I worked with on my first feature movie called Here that starred Ben Foster and Lubna Azabal. And then Joseph Krings came in and we finished the movie together. And that's a process I've used in the past. I seem to have a somewhat unusual process in which I do like to work with multiple editors. Everybody comes in knowing that. It's not like someone failed or did anything wrong. Andy is a brilliant editor. A lot of his work remains in the film. And then Joe came in and we really had a great tennis match. It's almost like you try to beat the previous work. It's like, can we best this, or is this actually the highest level we could get to? And there's something about changing perspective that I personally find very helpful. I was there every single day, all day, as we went through the footage and performances and recuts and test screenings and trying to pull it all together. And then I'm also very heavily involved in the scoring and the music as well.
And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. The music is also, it also almost feels like a character in the film. The music is so beautiful. At the same time, there's something a little haunting about it. How did you select the musicians that you worked with?
Sure. Michael Krasner, who was sort of the primary composer. He worked in tandem with another musician named Tim Ratilli as sort of dual composers on this film. Michael and I have known each other since I was in film school at USC in the early 90s. So it's a relationship that's probably coming up on 30 years almost. He's scored or had a hand in scoring every film I've made. And we have a language and a process that is incredibly organic at this point. He was also a partner in that recording studio I mentioned in Chicago in the 90s. So we have a long-standing collaboration that starts even before production, where we're sketching things out, talking about instrumentation, talking about arrangements, what instruments we want to use. And in this case, we knew we wanted to use instrumentation that was typical of the region, but that we wanted to use it in unusual ways. So we were experimenting with things like amplifying or bowing banjos, or using dulcimers in ways that were a little more haunting. And always with an eye toward, a lot of the film, the thematics of the film have to do with sort of a disturbance within great beauty, right? Like that's almost the opening shot of the movie, these gorgeous sunlit mountains and a mining explosion off in the distance. And so we were constantly talking about how to introduce little bits of distortion, even in the most beautiful pieces of music, whether that happened tonally or through instrumentation or literal guitar distortion. There's a thematic there that kind of echoes the distortion you see in the landscape throughout the film. There's almost not a shot in the movie that doesn't reveal the hand of man somewhere disrupting that landscape. And we wanted to carry that through all the music. So Michael and Tim, we always cast the scoring ensemble in the same way you almost do actors. So in this case, we had William Tyler, who I've been a fan of for a long time and recently scored Kelly Reichardt's First Cow and is a brilliant musician on his own. Shahzad Ismaili, who owns a studio here in Brooklyn called Figure Eight, and most recently was in Dylan's band for that beautiful piece that just came out, the new Dylan live concert film that was actually shot by Lowell Crawley. Lowell Crawley was the director of photography on that. He shot my first movie. And then varying ensemble musicians that Michael and Tim put together, including Paul DeJong, who had a band called The Books. We've done a lot of scoring work together. Robin Vinning, Lorraine Kaiser, to cast these voices that I'm talking about. So there's a deep level of thought that goes into that. And then one of the great benefits for me is that I never have to cut to temp scores. So we start putting in sort of sketches of pieces and refining them along the way as we figure out what works and what doesn't. And there's an opportunity there for that music to affect the edit as well, instead of just laying it on top at the end. So that's a process that feels very good to me. On the source cue side, I worked with a music supervisor named Chris Swanson, who was one of the founders of the Secretly Canadian group of labels. And Chris and I have also known each other for about 25 years. One of Secretly Canadian's very first releases was a live record from a live film and music tour that my first film, Dutch Harbor, went on in Europe. So that's also a long-standing collaboration. And between the Jason Molina and Songs Ohio tracks, Doug Paisley, Joan Shelley, who closes out the movie. There's 3 songs by Kathy Heidemann, who you could make a whole film about of her own. And that music was sort of lost for a long time and recently refound. It's just such a satisfying and deep part of the experience. It's almost like you're giving the movie a subconscious voice, or trying to give voice to the landscape or the hills or the inner lives of these characters through the music. And it's a part of it that is deeply, deeply interesting and inspiring to me.
I made a mental note that, I have to find this soundtrack on CD or vinyl or even Spotify.
Yeah. Because there's a playlist that we'll probably put out pretty soon of all the source cue tracks. And then I think there will eventually be an original soundtrack release, but we might put a SoundCloud up soon of that too, so that people can listen to it.
Tell us about your experience with Sundance. You've had a very warm reception to the film.
Well, Sundance has really been almost like a family to me. I went through the writer and director's labs there in 2007, again, with my first feature, a movie called Here. And it's sort of hard to overstate. Once you're in that family, you're in that family. and they're really there for you. Not so much in terms of like, it's not a given that you'll be accepted to the festival. You still have to do great work and that kind of thing, but it's you have sort of a family you can call on if you're having trouble, or even to find people to give feedback on cuts and that kind of thing. And it's really been an amazing experience to have been involved with Sundance and the Institute. As far as the evening hour premiere there, it couldn't have been more of a dream. I think the one of the deepest feelings I had was that when we got the call, and you never really know how these things are going to go. There's plenty of people that have been through those labs. It does happen all the time. It's not a guarantee that you're going to get in. And the biggest sigh of relief that I had was that it made me feel like we had done right by the people we had collaborated with down in southeastern Kentucky and Harlan County. And I was extremely gratified that everything they gave us was going to be given that platform and be heard. That we were able to amplify their voices and their generosity and their collaboration with a platform and a premiere like Sundance felt great. And in fact, I think we had about a dozen people from Harlan and the surrounding counties that came out to Park City for the premiere, which was pretty neat and special. And for them to be able to experience that and be there with us was deeply, deeply meaningful.
What are some of the misconceptions about being a filmmaker? I'm sure there are many. I'm sure you had an idea before getting into this, what it was going to be like for you, but what are some of the misconceptions that you feel people have about being a filmmaker?
How long do we have? First and foremost, the thing that comes to mind is it's a massive privilege to have the opportunity to do this work. One of the things I love about it the most is that it can be, I think I mentioned this earlier, it can be a very unique and privileged, and I don't mean necessarily financially, but a very privileged way of kind of being in the world. Like to be able to go to a place like Harlan, make the friends we did, collaborate with the people that we were able to meet down there, and kind of have these experiences and live life and bring something back that hopefully does all of that justice is a very, very fortunate and special. And I think that at least with the kinds of films that I've made, these aren't blockbusters necessarily. I'm not living in a house in Malibu. I do like Brooklyn a lot, so that's not necessarily a complaint. To a certain extent, you trade a certain degree of security for life experience. There are potentially more secure and lucrative things to do, but I don't know if you can get the kinds of experiences that we're able to have any other way. And so some of it depends on your kind of risk tolerance and tolerance for financial chaos at times and feast and famine and that kind of thing. It is a deeply, deeply rewarding vocation if you're privileged enough to be able to find ways to do it. And, maybe the one kind of answer I'd give, which maybe isn't the most insightful, is just that it's a lot of work. We shot this movie in the fall of 2018. We're still working on it. It's a lot of long hours, and it can be grueling physically, and it's not easy all the time. And it can be tough to be away from, your family and loved ones and things like that. But it balances out in other ways, for sure.
That's a great answer. And it does give us kind of a real good view of what that must be like. You are listening to Tower Talk Business Radio. Our guest today is filmmaker Braden King, director of The Evening Hour. I'm Ray Schwetz on the voice of Nassau Community College 90.3 WHPC. It seems like a lot of the experience, most of the experience was very positive, which I'm glad to hear. And certainly, watching the film, it's a very powerful, like I said, that's the word that keeps popping in my head. It's just a very powerful film. What would be the dream project for you now going forward? What would be the next project that you could go, I would really love to direct this?
Well, I think I'm continuing to continuing on the trajectory that I'm already on. So things that have a certain amount of, how do I put this? As we've talked about, I'm drawn to landscape and sort of film almost as like expedition, sort of, the cartographic elements of it. I like projects that allow for and depend on a certain amount of craft, photographic integrity, editorial integrity, all the music aspects that we talked about are very compelling to me. Lately, I've been more and more obsessed. I kind of start usually from the ground up. It was a little unusual to sort of start with a book and work toward the film for me. I currently am very obsessed with the Central Valley of California. And that's always been a place that I've felt is sort of also underrepresented in a way. There's some very classic movies that start to get at it, obviously like Chinatown and that kind of thing, which is really more of an LA movie, but moves up that way. But I just feel like there's so many, the sort of Steinbeck-esque region of California, almost between the 101 and the 5 and the Central Valley, up a little bit south of San Francisco and north of Los Angeles, seems incredibly fertile to me right now for stories, and a place where there haven't been that many told. So that's where my kind of current obsession is. And, looking at things that have strong narrative engines underneath the hood that take place in a dramatic landscape like that is really, really exciting to me.
Coming off of this work, I certainly, as a film goer, I really look forward to seeing more of your work, and wanted to thank you very much for the time that you spent with me today, talking about The Evening Hour. Can you tell us a little bit about what's next now? When does that come out, and where can we see it?
Sure. So The Evening Hour is going to be released in New York and Los Angeles starting on the 30th of July in New York at IFC Center. We open August 6th in Los Angeles at the Laemmle Theaters. And then there will be other engagements in Chicago, Louisville, and other cities following that as we get into August. And I think the best place to look for information on that is going to be on the Strand Releasing website, which I believe is strandreleasing.com. And they'll have updates on the different cities as they're booked in and that kind of thing. July 30th at IFC Center in New York, and August 6th at Laemmle Theaters in Los Angeles. Both of those will have initial Q&As and that kind of thing. And as mentioned, the more information will be on the strandreleasing.com website, as well as the film and my own social media and that kind of thing. And then the Alaskan film I mentioned, that's a movie called Dutch Harbor, where the sea breaks its back, and that's going to be re-released by Factory 25 next year. So that one's been out of circulation for a little while, but it's coming back in a restored version in 2022. I'm dating myself, but it's the 25th anniversary of the film, which is a little crazy. I was very young when I made it. Wow. But it's such experiences. I mean, it's great. And like I said, it translates into the movie, and, you love these people, and you worry for them. And so you did every reason that you go to the movies is in this film. Wow. So, well, on behalf of the whole cast and crew and everybody that took care of the baby, thank you. It's very gratifying to hear, and I'll definitely relay it. And as a film goer, like I said, I would highly recommend that, seeing this film on a big screen, now that we have the big screens back again, this is a great way to experience the film. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us today, Braden. And we're very excited about the film, and good luck. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the conversation. Even though my co-host, Anisha Boston Hill, could not join us today, I'd like to leave you with DB's philosophy. And it's a quote from Walt Disney. "We don't make movies to make more money. We make money to make more movies." We want to thank you for being with us. My name is Ray Schwetz, along with Anisha Boston Hill, your co-host and producers. This is an NCC Foundation Business Leaders Council production. Visit ncc.edu/WHPC for more information. Available on Odyssey, iHeartRadio, as a podcast on iTunes, Android Podcasts, and Spreaker. This has been Tower Talk Business Radio, powered by the Nassau Community College Foundation, on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that we can give our daughters everything they need to grow and learn. But not every child can focus on classes and play dates.
Nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. face hunger. That's 1 in 6. School lunch might be their only meal each day, and it's heartbreaking to imagine any child going to bed hungry. We're dreaming of a perfect day when kids can smile, play, and just be kids without worrying about where their next meal will come from. Feeding America is working to make that perfect day a reality.
Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste. That food is given to families and children in need. Being a kid should be about doing things that make an ordinary day extraordinary. Learning to play an instrument, building a sandcastle, hosting tea parties. Hunger should never be an obstacle to growing up.
You can help end childhood hunger in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.